So you may or may not have heard about this new political party that are trying to break through, pun very much intended, into the political scene in the United Kingdom, and they're called the Breakthrough Party. There are a left-wing sort of grassroots progressive party, and I think it's really, really interesting what they're saying. This is their policy platform. They've got sort of 10 pledges here. Hopefully they kind of stick to their guns, unlike Keir Starmer with his 10 pledges. So these are really interesting. So take a look. So number one, we've got a £15 real living wage. £15 is obviously a lot more than what both Labour and the Tories have committed to. Scrapping 0 hours contracts and banning fire and rehire practices. Renationalising the NHS and social care. Building genuinely affordable housing for need, not profit. Limiting rents to 30% of local income and ending no-fault evictions. Introducing a universal basic income, which I think is a very interesting one. Public ownership of utilities and transport and broadband. Defending the right to protest and standing in solidarity with marginalised communities. Collaborating across borders to build a global Green New Deal. And making votes matter with proportional representation. That's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to be talking about these different policies and how I think that could affect the political landscape of the UK, what I think about the specific policies in terms of their merit, and what I think the Labour Party can learn from this, and if the Labour Party, or indeed the Conservative Party, will learn anything from this at all. So, first thing, a £15 real living wage. Now, that's really interesting. What's obvious is the vast majority of people in the UK, and in most countries around the world really, believe that the minimum wage needs to be a lot higher, right? Because essentially you have people who are being told they're essential workers and have been being told that since the beginning of the pandemic. People who, without those jobs, the economy simply wouldn't function. Being paid starvation wages, poverty wages. It has to stop. Most people agree that. But there's a lot of debate about how much it needs to go up by. And of course, in the general election, both Labour and the Conservatives promised an increase in the minimum wage to about £10 an hour. The Conservatives wanted to phase that in a lot more gradually, whereas Labour wanted to be more immediate. Now, there's arguments about which of those is the right approach. In all honesty, I kind of think that, to be honest, the Conservative approach of gradually phasing it in is a better policy. But if you're going to phase it in over this 4-year period when to something that it should have been several years before anyway, that's, clearly misguided and not enough. So £15, I think, is probably acceptable. I don't think that, that's too much. I think people who are working a minimum wage job are doing an incredibly difficult job. And if you're watching this and you're thinking, oh my word, £15 to, flip burgers in McDonald's, £15 to do this, that, and the other, £15. Well, I only get £15 and I do this more important, more difficult job. Well, mate, the problem isn't that the minimum wage workers are suddenly getting paid too much if they get £15 an hour. The problem is you're getting paid too little, right? The vast majority of the time, people need to realise that when we're talking about wages, if you're denying a wage increase for someone else, you're actually not helping the problem. You're just trying to keep someone else down so that even though you're in a bad position, it's not as bad as theirs, so you can feel a bit better about yourself. No. Improve everyone's situation. And who will it be at the expense of? Well, maybe the ultra wealthy, maybe the executives and the shareholders and the CEOs and the venture capitalists and the bankers. Maybe they'll have to pay a bit more in taxes. Maybe they'll have to give up some of their shares to their workforce. Whatever it may be, but I think a £15 minimum wage is actually pretty sensible. So the second one, scrap 0-hour contracts and ban fire and rehire practices. Now, as the name would suggest, fire and rehire, just in case you don't know, is basically when a company fires its workers, sacks them off, and then rehires them with worse wages or potentially with worse working conditions or whatever. So basically the rules of their job are changed. but they've just been sacked. They don't have a job, so they're more desperate, so they come back, right? Technically, it's well within the realm of the law. You can do it. It shouldn't be. Labour has actually come out in support of this, I think, or at least Keir Starmer's been very, very critical of it, because British Gas is probably the most infamous recent example of that in the UK. And scrapping 0-hour contracts, pretty obviously good. You know, some people argue it's flexible, so that's good, but it's also hellish for workers. You know, I think most people would definitely prefer stable employment. So that's really good, and that's a very obvious one, and I think that's definitely a vote winner. Now, you know, we'll get on a little bit later, we'll talk about if the Breakthrough Party actually stands a chance of winning anything. Spoiler alert, no. But, you know, it's certainly something that I think can garner support. The third one, renationalise the NHS and social care. Obviously, the NHS is majority publicly owned. That's fantastic, but it's had gradual creeping privatisation over the past, you know, 2 decades. Arguably even longer. So totally renationalising it, bringing every aspect of the NHS into public ownership, and obviously that's continuing. You know, with this privatisation, we're seeing, you know, American pharmaceutical companies, American health insurance companies taking over different aspects of the NHS, taking over you know, GP practices and things. That needs to be fought as hard as we possibly can, because let me tell you, we do not want to go down the route of America when it comes to healthcare. We really do not. And I think anyone watching this who isn't from the States knows that. And I think most people from the States probably know that as well, really. So the whole thing with social care is also a great idea. We have a massive social care crisis. I also think this is a vote winner. I think it's one of those things where people will be like, oh, okay, well, the NHS is partially privatised. Social care is a total disaster. We need to eliminate the profit motive and just do it in terms of what's best for people, right? And we fund that through taxation, we publicly own it. We can change it democratically via the will of the people. You know, it's a vote winner, in my view, and it's more important than that, the right thing to do. Number 4 is build genuinely affordable housing for need, not profit. Again, this is one of those common sense things that most people support. I think often they don't support the whole vision, because when, like, Labour proposes things like that, because like in 2019, that's a perfect example. People don't buy into the whole vision. They don't think it's going to be possible. They don't think certainly Labour won't be able to do it, right? But it is a great policy, and I think if you make it one of the hallmarks, actually, you know, I have this theory that the best way to run an election, in terms of the more general campaigning, because obviously modern advertising and modern campaigning can be done really specifically online, but when you're doing the more general stuff like the billboards and the TV and the speeches and all that stuff and the slogans, you know, I think you need, like, basically a policy pyramid. So there's your primary policy. There's usually one thing that's, like, really big, and on this list, I'd say the really big thing should probably be renationalising the NHS and social care, right? Because I think that's a massive vote winner. It's very clear what you're doing, and it's really good policy. But building genuinely affordable housing for need, not for profit, that could be in the secondary section, where you have kind of like 3 or 4 that you kind of hammer home a lot. Not as much as the main one, but quite a lot. Because I think that is a really good policy. And then to win over more voters, you can go for some of those other things like proportional representation. I think a really good one for getting older voters on board would probably be, I'm just looking at them here, I think the NHS and the social care one is probably the big one for that. And then, you know, for young people, the proportional representation, housing, those kind of things, that's going to work really well. Same goes for the next one. So on the kind of tertiary level of the policy pyramid is all the other stuff that you just mention occasionally when the issue comes up, right? For example, universal broadband. I think that should be a tertiary one, because it's a great policy. But I think if you kind of come at people with that, they're going to be like, all right, I mean, that's good and everything, but, you know, that's not really the top of my list of priorities, even now when it's been demonstrated how important it is. So the next one is limit rents to 30% of local income and end no-fault evictions. Again, a great policy. We have a ridiculous housing situation here in the UK, whether it's people's ability to afford housing, or the power, the simple power that landlords have over something that is an essential service, something that every single person in the UK should have access to, and that's housing. You know, it's a basic human right. It's a real mess. So those two policies are really, really good to see. Introduce universal basic income. That's going to be very difficult to sell, I think, because it's not exactly one of those policies that when you explain it to people straight away, they're like, well, that'll never work because people will just stay at home and they won't work, right? So you have to do a bit more explaining for that one. But the reason I'm talking about this, by the way, from like a political point of view, not just a, oh, that's good point of view, is because I think it's pretty obvious that everything on here is good to most people. It's just what I want to kind of demonstrate in this video is that the Labour Party, what I want to demonstrate in this video is that the Labour Party should be doing this, right? Because it's actually politically advantageous as well. It's a smart move if you want to win an election, not just because it's the right thing to do. Publicly owned utilities, transport and broadband, yeah, great stuff. Defend the right to protest and stand in solidarity with marginalised communities. You know, again, Labour Party can learn from that, certainly with the situation going on in Gaza at the moment, the horrific treatment of the Palestinian people. Number 9 is collaborate across borders to build a global Green New Deal. I mean, that's something that absolutely has to be done. It's a necessity that we need to rapidly decarbonise all of the world's economies, transition to renewable energy sources, away from fossil fuels, and, you know, create a lot of good jobs and a lot of great infrastructure in the process. I mean, it's a fabulous policy. Difficult and will require a lot of international cooperation, but yeah. And number 10 is make votes matter with proportional representation. I think it's pretty obvious, I think, to most people that our electoral system is at least a bit dodgy, right? I've supported proportional representation for a long time. I think it's a great policy, and I think the majority of the people in the country support it. I'm sure there's been polls done on that. I don't have them to hand right now. But yeah, so that is their policy platform. Now, obviously, that's just 10 kind of policy groupings. There's a lot more in detail, and if you want, you can check out their website to see more of what they're about. But I saw this and I thought it was really, really interesting because it demonstrates some real common sense, progressive bread and butter policies. You know, every single one of these, you point them out to someone who's, you know, just a regular person on the street. They're going to be like, oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea, that. 9 times out of 10, I can guarantee it. Because these policies, they're not pie in the sky ridiculous, you know. I'm not talking about nationalising your mum or, you know, turning the economy into Soviet Russia or something, you know, ridiculous, you know. And I'm sure the media will attempt to twist these kind of policies that way because they always have. You know, I mean, literally called the publicly owned broadband policy that Labour had in 2019, broadband communism. And that was the BBC as well that called it broadband communism. So, you know, these kind of policies are obviously going to be smeared and things. But I think there isn't much getting away from it, really, that these are good policies. So can the Breakthrough Party actually break through? I don't think so. The reason I don't think they can isn't because I think they're incompetent or their policies are bad or anything like that. I think it's just the nature of our electoral system. Unfortunately, as most of you probably know, first past the post, that's what we have. And it preserves the two-party system very, very effectively in the UK. Although it does seem now like it's changing its preservation from 2 parties to 1, because the Conservatives seem basically unbeatable at the moment. And they've been in power for 11 years, will be 14 by the time of the next election. So it seems very, very difficult to stand a chance from the point of view of the Breakthrough Party or indeed any other party. But I think the reason this is important for Labour is because this could very easily chip away even a small chunk of their voter base, which would be devastating for them because that has happened a lot recently anyway. Labour's vote share has been very, very poor in recent polls, way behind the Conservatives. All the recent polls have shown that Labour would get absolutely decimated. Some of them show that they do a bit better than 2019. Some of them show that they actually do worse. There's a poll we discussed, I believe it was in the last video, about that, and Labour would actually get fewer seats on those numbers than they did in 2019, which was already a disastrous defeat. So they need every single vote they can. And if people who are looking for actual change, people who are looking for tangible change, but they can't trust the Conservatives, or they don't believe that they're actually going to deliver on that, or what they're saying they're going to deliver isn't good enough, they're going to look to Labour. Labour's going to be offering nothing. At least that's kind of the situation they're in at the moment. And they're going to look at this party, the Breakthrough Party, and they're going to be like, oh, well, you know, that's pretty good. And, you know, maybe they stand no chance of winning, but, you know, at least I'll vote for something I believe in. That happens a lot. It's also not sort of tainted by the stigma of the Green Party as this kind of like metropolitan, middle class, you know, hippy dippy kind of party, which it very much isn't. You know, there's a lot of working class support behind that, and actually a lot of the young people who support it are working class. They don't have loads of money in the bank. They're certainly not middle class. They're certainly not upper class. It's just they get kind of tarnished with that brand. The Breakthrough Party doesn't have that. So, do I think that there'll be a successful major political party? No. But I think it's really interesting to see that what they're doing here with these policies, those kind of policies are popular. And I think Labour really needs to take stock of the fact that it is not 1995 anymore. It's not 2005. You cannot get away with promising tiny little tinkering changes around the edges. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. And even if they ditch Keir Starmer, which I think they probably will within the next year, doesn't look good for them. So the Breakthrough Party are proposing some really good stuff, and it's really nice to see a party that just seems to be genuinely principled. We haven't seen that in a little while, I feel. So, yeah, very interesting. I'll be watching this party as we go into the future, because I think they're going to be doing some pretty cool stuff, I feel, even if they don't have some kind of major success. So we'll see where it goes, and hopefully this is going to be a new breath of life in progressive politics in the UK, but we'll just have to wait and see. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed the video, if you liked it, you know, then why not translate that into a digital form and click the like button? Or, you know, even better, if you're feeling extra wild, subscribe and click the bell.